Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 22 of Series 5. The question this evening is, can we find criteria that we can use to determine the priority of values? The reading, as always, for those who want it, from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 2, Section 9. And again, for context, our overall objective is to grasp human existence as consciousness and to resolve the problems in terms of value. So we previously outlined and defined value and its problems of subjectivity and justification as posed by human more. Last week we examined the significance of happiness, knowledge, truth, consciousness and morality. So also we could say, in these workshops we discuss technical topics, but these topics are directly related to questions of human existence. And I feel that they are akin to the blue pill, red pill question posed by the character Morpheus in The Matrix. Take the blue pill and you will wake up the next day, forget the questions and be happy. Take the red pill and the questions will remain urgent, yet there may be never any satisfactory answers, yet I think there are. Now, last week I concluded that only values, as value states, could be plausibly adequate human objectives. Now, value states are states that necessarily harbour values. Now, value states is my term. I don't know if anybody else uses it. So value states like love, hate, meaning, self-esteem, honour, greed, outrage. Now, Nietzsche agrees about the importance of the question of the priority of values and value states. Heidegger and Sartre, on the other hand, believe that the question of priority has largely been answered in the question of being. But Nietzsche cited the future task of philosophers as the determination of the order and rank among values. Yet I think that Nietzsche understates himself here, because elsewhere he and other existentialists advocate creating new values. And rank and hierarchy have also given way to radical revisions of value and questions of coherence. Similarly, my objective isn't just to find order and rank among values, but to discover new values. My central hypothesis is that of a certain sufficiency of value consistent with a will to value. What we don't want to do, though, is to reconstruct some moralistic hierarchy of values on questionable presuppositions. For example, one dubious hierarchy might be from beginning at egoistic to pragmatic to social to altruistic and spiritual values. Well, that's the kind of hierarchy that I don't want to envisage. So, for the sake of completeness, I first want to note three criteria of value or moral value that I don't find convincing. These are universality, freedom and cost. First, consider universality as a criterion of priority for value or moral value. Universality is central to Kant's categorical imperative as a criterion of morality. But universality is about the material content of action that doesn't account for subjective qualities. Kant had to refer to quality of intention or goodwill to account for this subjective quality. Universality is also seen as a rationalist basis of uncertain application in all situations. I'll look at this again, the idea of intention again later. Freedom is a criterion of value, also emphasized by Kant, Sartre, existentialists and others. Freedom, or free choice, both affects quality of intention and is a precondition of moral value. But freedom isn't the only thing that affects quality of intention, and preconditions aren't intrinsically valuable. For example, water is a precondition of life, but water isn't intrinsically valuable. Consider cost now as a criterion of value. Cost, that is, value is determined by the price or cost paid. This may be a realistic account in commerce, psychology, or even in Christian atonement theory. Cost theory of value even seems to play a part in Sartre's theory of value as lack, need, or desire. But again, there are many instances of value that are not explicable as cost, as in magnanimity or love. In considering different criteria for the priority of different kinds of values, we should also review moral values. Last week we noted that morality has traditionally been one of mankind's highest values or ideals. For example, the neo-Kantian R.D. Ross implausibly prioritizes morals over all others, for example, extreme pain. Kant similarly held that we must never lie because moral laws must never be broken. Such extreme moral values are almost self-refuting in the face of reason as reasonableness. But we saw that moderate moral values and morality in general can also have inadequacies. Moral values can be inhuman, omit experiences like meaning and purpose, and lack an inclusive principle of life. That is, moral values are just one aspect of human values which needs to be set in a wider context of value. In my view, what is special about morality is that it affords the ethical agent a privileged sphere of activity. And in this privileged sphere, the agent is able to enjoy the reflected value of supposedly objective values. This need not be a blanket criticism, but a way into inescapable or even normative values. And the idea of inescapable value leads us to consider intrinsic values. As noted, intrinsic values have priority over attributed values almost by definition. But what are they? What are intrinsic values? I previously argued that only mental states and conscious beings are candidates of intrinsic value, and that only positive value states that necessarily instantiate value are intrinsic values. Examples of such positive value states are love, self-esteem, courage, and magnanimity. but we saw that the ascription of intrinsic value did not resolve questions of priority or adequacy, because there are degrees of intrinsic value, and intrinsic value doesn't automatically mandate action. For example, I love my wife more than my dog, and I have respect for my neighbour, but that doesn't mean that I must help him. So we still need criteria to determine priority of intrinsic values. G.E. Moore and Robert Nozick determined both priority and intrinsic value with its degree of organic unity. Higher degrees of organic unity are held to herald higher value. But as Nozick points out, organic unity can also be a property of negative events. For example, concentration camps, hatred, evil plans, wars, and the concept of the devil. Yet this problem of negative events is due to convention and the objectification of value in material terms. As an internal property of thought, outside moral convention, organic unity still works as a criterion. Yet given material content, organic unity becomes a subject to positive and negative judgments. Unified but negative values like hatred and disgust are then eliminated as intrinsic value. I myself think that organic unity could be more simply described as coherence. As an example, I like the idea of God as a mythological example of organic unity or coherence. In this religious context, Satan would represent the coherent but negative value. Related to the notion of coherence, we also have consistency as a criterion for the priority of value. Consistency here means reduction of psychological, ontological, or theoretical gaps or fissures. For example, I'm thinking about constraints on value like Hume's principle and Sartre's bad faith. To derive an ought from an is involves an inconsistency that affects quality of value if recognised. I find Sartre's constraints on value have even more influence on the quality of value. For example, he said we are condemned to choose, condemned to be free, and avoidance of choice and freedom is bad faith. And he goes on, another of his concepts, the spirit of seriousness, we pretend that subjective values are objective to avoid freedom and responsibility. The concept of consistency excludes self-contradictory and self-negating values that I want to discuss shortly. Yet the notions of coherence and consistency also bring us back to quality as a criterion of value. The priority of value, due to its quality, may be crucial, but again, what does quality of value mean? Many factors affect quality of value in addition to coherence, consistency, authenticity, and morality. Kant argued for the quality of intention in the goodwill as the primary criteria of morality. For Kant, moral action needs to be free, informed, and without constraints or inclination. With Kant, though, we are led back to freedom, reason, and the rejection of natural inclinations to act. Now, Quality is a principle that also Robert Nozick discovers in his 1970s work, I think, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Persic sees quality as excellence in human artifacts, but he neglects quality as a value state. But then we need to define quality as a property of value states like self-esteem and love. One of the major factors determining quality of value is the nature of its physical or mental object. Different objects like truth, beauty, God, or sex objects will produce different qualities of value. Unexpectedly, the quality of object can also vary in its degree of cognitive involvement, or we could say in its absence of involvement. I previously described this as attenuated cognition in explanations of mystery, obfuscation, and morals. I will discuss this graduated account of cognition next week. One of the most elusive aspects of determining a priority of values is that values are subject to choice. That is, in ignorance or indifference to constraints of consciousness, we can simply choose our values. Many values are, however, entrenched in genetic, social, and ideological structures. But in principle, all values are eventually subject to choice, and some values require choice. But some non-cognitivist and existentialist accounts present choice as totally open and without restriction. Yet, in addition to such constraints as coherence, consistency, bad faith, and degrees of intrinsic value, I propose a more substantive form of constraint based on the character of value itself. I want to start with the earlier idea that intrinsic values necessarily instantiate values within themselves. This at least resolves the problem of not being able to justify values on the basis of external features. External justification is prevented by Hume's principle, Moore's fallacy, and Mackey's subjectivity. The underlying idea here is a self-validating principle in the value of value, the will to value, and the pursuit of value. The questions of the basis and origins of value and its expressions are discussed elsewhere. Yet even a self-validating principle must be a pragmatic choice from the best alternatives that we can muster. I provide explanations of other aspects in other workshops. Yet I can summarize them in 2 points. Firstly, trivial values are initially provided as constituents of consciousness in the world. And secondly, further values are obtained by self-validation, by consistency of derivation, and a value theory ethic. Despite this shortcoming, we can nevertheless start with a brief outline of the idea of self-validating systems. David Hilbert described mathematics as avoidance of contradiction and is therefore a self-validating a priori system. Logic is determined by self-evident truths, resulting in Aristotle's 4 principles of logic. Physics is not self-validating because it is an a posteriori system determined by observations. One self-validating system within the human sphere is Descartes' I think, therefore I am. But the I think, therefore I am is a self-validating system that didn't go very far due to its rationalist assumptions. More relevantly, there have been other attempts at presenting value in self-validating systems. Our previous criticism of abstract principles and cognitive states as intrinsic value reveals such a case. The weakness of Kant's self-validating categorical imperative was also due to its reliance on reason. And Ronald Dworkin's independent sphere of value similarly depends on knowledge and interpretation. These kinds of failure underline the importance of basing self-validation on value itself. So my proposal of the will to value is part of a criterion for the priority of value that resolves these kinds of problems. The will to value is an affirmation of value to value and is the pursuit of value. The alternative of not valuing value is contradictory, self-negating and self-defeating. Therefore, the will to value value is a self-validating system. But self-validating systems still need to be evaluated from a wider perspective, and several points can be made on this count. Firstly, the will is an affirmative function of value that enables value to have its own internal foundation. This system doesn't start with facts, knowledge or reason, but with the existence of value. Then requirements and consistencies enable the value of value to become a principle of value. The will to value, as the value of value, may sound like a meaningless tautology, but Robert Nozick speaks of valuing values. I'm speaking about valuing value. Secondly, we can ask what drives the will to value, to further value as a principle. In this context, we can compare and contrast the will to value to Nietzsche's will to power. Nietzsche's will to power was decried by Heidegger, who interpreted it as the will to will. Yet the will is an aspect of value, and Nietzsche's major concerns are the will to will as well as the will to value. So we might ask why Nietzsche advocated the will to power and not the will to value. There are a lot of possible answers that we don't have time to explore here. Instead, Nietzsche regarded the will to power as a pervasive force through all biological life. Nietzsche's will to power is over-inclusive, extreme, and of dubious Teutonic origins. Foucault also uses the concept of power as an explanatory principle, but not as a guiding principle. Yet these notions of power introduce the idea of the will to value as a general principle. But thirdly, the will to value is not an esoteric force. The will implies value, and both are constitutive of consciousness producing the will to value. It's a normal function of consciousness passing through time and projecting into the future. It is producing values in its selections, choices, and dealing with the world. The will to value simply connects value to the will and to consciousness. These considerations may support the idea of the will to value as part of a criterion of the priority of value. Yet questions arise. What is the outcome of the will to value? Here I propose a sufficiency of value. Last week we considered happiness as an affect state, knowledge as a cognitive state, and morals as a value state. This led back to a previous conclusion that a principle of life needed to be found in the realm of value, and that an adequate principle needed to be characterized as a sufficiency of value. The concept of sufficiency has been defined in different ways that can be contrasted to a sufficiency of value. The principle of sufficient reason, for example, calls for adequate explanations or grounds of existence for everything. The sufficiency of pleasure is that it remains pleasurable regardless of beliefs or social disapproval. Happiness is more subject to cognition, but happiness is satisfying in itself without endorsement. Again, love seeks independence from fact and circumstance and is considered a more refined value state. A couple of weeks ago I defined value sufficiency in relation to intrinsic value and positive value states. For example, states of self-esteem, love, maturity, ethical fortitude, magnanimity, and courage. Intrinsic values are value states that necessarily instantiate value. That is, like the states above, but not states like perception or belief. We also noted that all sufficient values are intrinsic values, but not all intrinsic values are sufficient values. This is because many intrinsic values are trivial and aren't sufficient as ends, like meaning and purpose. And sufficient values are determined by their quality, not quantity, as sufficiency might be thought to imply. Neither are they fixed quantities, but depend upon the individual's circumstances. So, in conclusion, the proposed criteria for the priority of value are, therefore, the will to value consistent with a sufficiency of value. The many gaps in the explanation leading to this conclusion can only be filled in by other studies. We began by eliminating universality, freedom and cost as adequate criteria for the priority of value. Moral and intrinsic values gave us more focus to the kind of criteria that we are looking for. The notions of coherence, consistency and quality gave us more specificity in this regard. Yet the concepts of self-validation, the will to value and sufficiency of value were key to finding priority of value. And in my hypothesis, my hypothesis is of a certain sufficiency of value consistent with a will to value value. Okay, we'll leave it there. Please let me have your criticisms and comments on the Meetup website, at the meeting or somewhere else. Thank you.